Hello, everybody, and welcome to We Measure the World, a podcast produced by scientists for scientists.
My gut is telling me that this is where we're going to see the best bang for our buck in terms of return on investment for improving carbon in our soils. It's going to be in the Western United States. We're going to see drastic improvements. And I'll tell you from some of my experiences with other soil health projects that if you do things, quote, right, you might see a change in less than 5 years. In fact, we had a project over on the western slope of Colorado where we saw changes in 3 years in terms of organic carbon accumulation in the soil surface. In 3 years.
That's a small taste of what we have in store for you today. We Measure the World explores interesting environmental research trends, how scientists are solving research issues, and what tools are helping them better understand measurements across the entire soil-plant atmosphere continuum. Today's guests are Steve Blecker and Jim Ippolito. Steve Blecker is a research soil scientist with the Ag Experiment Station at Colorado State University. He obtained his bachelor's at Penn State University and graduate degrees in pathology at Colorado State University. His research focuses on sustainable agriculture, soil health, and rangeland restoration. Steve is actively involved in collaborative projects with the farming community and contributes to the advancement of sustainable and resilient agricultural practices. Jim Ippolito is currently a professor in the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State University. He obtained his bachelor's in agronomy from the University of Delaware and his graduate degrees in soil chemistry, fertility, and quality from Colorado State University. Jim is an expert in and teaches soil fertility and soil health principles and practices. He is actively involved in research, teaching, and extension activities, working to improve soil health and fertility for the benefit of farmers, land managers, and the environment. And today they're here to talk about their research into agroecosystem management, soil health, and ecosystem sustainability and resiliency. So Steve and Jim, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Brad.
All right. So today we wanted to talk about a few of your projects and research interests. But first, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved in soil science and your particular specialties?
Yeah, I just sort of wandered into soils, really. I mean, I didn't really know what I wanted to do at Penn State, and just was kind of wandering around taking different classes. And the day I took an intro to soils class, and then something just clicked. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I mean, people actually study soils. I mean, wow. So I just took all the soils classes I could get a hold of, and then my undergrad ran out, and I just wanted to keep going. So turned to grad school and been learning about soils ever since.
What got you involved in kind of the agricultural side and with extension activities?
Well, that's pretty recent development for me. I was doing more basic research for a lot of my career anyway, and then just kind of when I came back to Colorado and in my current position, there was just this opportunity to do a lot of more kind of applied research, just kind of work with growers in different agroecosystems, and just kind of, I know it was exciting to me to be able to, instead of, I used to publish in, not that I don't publish anymore, but in scientific journals and maybe read by a handful of people, but now it's more, I'm more interested in, kind of connecting with growers and just helping them understand the soils that they're working with.
And Jim, how about you?
Well, my path into soils is much like Steve's. When I was an undergrad, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was geared towards sciences. My science is in my blood, basically, in my genes. And I knew I didn't want to go into chemistry. My family has a long history of being in the chemistry field, so I steered clear of chemistry. I really steered clear of chemistry. And then I stumbled across a horticulture class when I was a freshman. I said, that's interesting. Let me go see if there's any other classes that are offered within the College of Ag at the University of Delaware. And just like Steve, I took Intro to Soil Science, and I was hooked. It just felt right. And lo and behold, there is a lot of chemistry in soil science. And so I'm a chemist. I consider myself a soil chemist, and I love it. I just love what I do. I've been involved with a lot of different sectors, though. A lot of ag, over my 30 plus year career. In fact, most of it has been in ag, but also in sites that have been contaminated with heavy metals. More recently, sites that are contaminated with these forever chemical compounds, PFASs and PFOAs. And, I just solving problems. I'm really an applied soil chemist, and I love what I do. And I've known Steve, we've both known each other for, oh my gosh, since 1990. We went to grad school together at Colorado State University, and our paths have just done this. We've interwoven our paths over the years, so which is why we still work together.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. That's good that you guys still like each other then after working together so long.
Yeah, more or less.
And I do hope that maybe we can come back and talk about those forever chemicals. That was kind of a side discussion that I think is really interesting and pertinent to a lot of stuff that's been, popping up recently. I mean, but anyway, maybe we'll come back to that later. So one of the I guess themes or I guess overarching research interests that seems to be within both of your specialties deals with soil health, or what we would now call soil health. I know in the intro, Jim, we talked about I mentioned that your degrees were in soil chemistry, fertility, quality, which is kind of what now we would term soil health. I was wondering if you guys could just kind of give our audience a basic overview of what is considered now soil health. What are the principles that go into soil health? How do we quantify or measure soil health and kind of all those kinds of things?
Okay, I'll take a crack at it and then fill in the gaps, Steve. So,
Sure.
When I think about soil health and when I talk about soil health to a lot of people that maybe are not strongly familiar with soil health, this is how I approach it. I approach it much like discussing human health. And when we go to the doctor because maybe we don't feel right, and the doctor runs a bunch of tests on us, right? So a doctor may ask you to run on a treadmill, for example, to take a look at maybe physical health. You'll get a blood draw. So blood might be chemical health. And sooner or later down the line, somebody's probably going to start taking some gut microbiome samples from you, and that's a measure of biological health. So when we talk about health, especially with humans, we oftentimes never talk about health directly, but we look at the measurements that we think are geared towards human health, or the good human health, if you will. We do the same thing with soils. So in soils, we look at soil physical characteristics, chemical characteristics, and certainly biological characteristics. And we look for sometimes we call it the sweet spot, at least that's what I call it, where all three of these physical, chemical, and biological overlap. And, you can think of three circles overlapping. Many of us have used this analogy before. And looking at where that circle in the center encompasses the, quote, best of physical, chemical, and soil biological health. So that's my approach. And to be honest with you, I've used this approach for, oh my gosh, almost my entire career without even knowing it. What do you think, Steve?
Man, that's a hard act to follow, dude. I like the analogy with the human health. I hadn't thought of that. That's pretty good. But no, I mean, you're right. It's the name has changed. It didn't always used to be soil health, but the things we measure, I mean, those three major biology, chemistry, and the physical properties of soil. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's how they interact to determine, how, healthy your soil is going to be for, what the end use is. In our case, a lot of it's agriculture. So how do these different properties interact? So
along with what you're talking about with, I guess continuing with that analogy or metaphor of human health, are there, I guess there's two questions that I have here, and maybe they're kind of overlapping here, but when we're dealing with human health, we will check our pulse to see if we're still alive, right? That's kind of a very basic overview of how you're doing, right? If you're healthy, you're alive. But like you said, there's other aspects as well. Are there, and I don't want to say are there shortcuts, but are there particular measurements or characteristics of the soil itself where you can kind of say, hey, kind of just to take a quick snapshot and say, soil's doing pretty good because of X, Y, and Z? Or is it something where you really do have to dig in to each of those physical, biological, and chemical characteristics to really say how healthy that soil is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if there's any shortcuts because every soil is different, and even if the soil is the same, the management practices under which the soil is under, well, that's the management practices that are being applied to a soil, even if the soil is the same, changes the soil. We all know that. So quantifying soil health it can be somewhat tricky because if you want to take a shortcut and you know a shortcut in one soil, it may not be applicable for a completely different soil. Mm-hmm. And so I think about the programs that we run at Colorado State University and Ohio State University, and we look at a number of different indicators or soil characteristics that encompass physical, chemical, and biological health. And what we try to do is tease out the minimum data set that would be for a specific soil or maybe a specific management system or something along those lines, which is basically what we're doing with a number of projects that we have at Colorado State University. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to have a producer send in a soil sample to our testing facility or another testing facility to analyze for 20 different characteristics when maybe only 3 are necessary.
Right.
But that's the sweet spot that we look for in these different systems.
Mm-hmm. I guess would soil health, like you said, there's differences between how soil might look, or a particular type of soil within varied agricultural or other land management uses. How would I guess what would a healthy soil look like if we want to stereotype or whatever? What would a healthy soil look like in an agricultural field versus a healthy soil, say even just in general environment? So within, I don't know if getting into forestry is too deep for you guys or whatever, and versus I don't know if we're dealing with soil health as much in more of the civil engineering side of things. There's different things that they look at for that. But how would a healthy soil, what would a healthy soil look like in those different situations? And is there some overlap, or would you expect completely different soil profile? Not profiles to, I don't want to say but different soil, like suites of characteristics within those different regions or spaces.
Well, yeah, the big concern in Colorado is water. I mean, we're a pretty dry state, and anything you can do to improve the water holding capacity of the soil, that generally will help the soil health. It will also help plant productivity. So, you can just go out into a field and dig up the surface of soil, and you can see how well it's aggregated. What kind of pore space can the water move freely down into the soil, so it can be stored, how much organic matter. You'll always hear, you can't get away from soil health without talking about organic matter or soil carbon, because it's so key to so many different properties. One of which, of course, is its ability to hold water. So if you go out in a field and look side by side, you can just pull out a clod of soil and see how well it's aggregated versus, I've seen people like the NRCS, they'll take a chunk of soil that's healthy and put it in like a big clear cylinder and let it sit there. And if it's, the healthier soil kind of stays together, the aggregates hold together, whereas a soil that's, quote unquote, less healthy tends to, kind of break apart and fall apart much quicker. So there's a lot of visual cues you can look at.
How, I guess, what are are there some general principles, I guess, for land managers to think about when it comes to just overall improving their soil health? If there were just key steps or, just kind of a basic outline for how to improve your soil health, what would those look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Having a PhD, I often use the term "it depends,"
Right.
because it really depends on where you're located. So I think about the projects that we have where we're using meter group equipment. We're using them dominating the western United States, specifically Colorado, and then in other surrounding states, but mainly Colorado. And if we're talking about the western U.S., so in Colorado, for example, a basic outline would be, like Steve just mentioned, focusing first on carbon. And anything that you can do to improve organic carbon content in the soils of Colorado, for example, you're going to win the battle, and you likely will see an improvement in soil health. And there's a reason behind this, because the soils in Colorado are naturally low in organic carbon content, and they've become lower over time because of historical agricultural practices. So anything we can do to increase organic carbon in these soils that are relatively fragile, that typically have less than probably 3.5% organic carbon or organic matter to begin with, is a bonus in the western United States. And that leads to what Steve mentioned: increases in water holding capacity, aggregate stability. Carbon is a food source for microorganisms that enhance nutrient cycling and turnover, which enhances the chemistry of soils, and it's all linked together. And if you looked at those three circles, biology, chemistry, and physical aspects, the sweet spot where those three overlap is carbon. It's really carbon in the center. That's how I look at it. I'm not a carbon chemist. I'm definitely not a carbon chemist, but we measure carbon, and we've measured carbon in our soils for decades. Steve and I have done this for 30 plus years together. Yeah, because this ties in with what we're doing with the equipment. And so, in the western U.S., we're drought prone. And so anything we can do to increase water holding capacity of our soils is a benefit. So in terms of soil health, we're looking for systems that producers manage that get a little bit more bang for the buck in terms of carbon storage, and subsequently utilizing meter group's equipment to take a look at the changes in moisture holding capacity over time. And one of the things that's just really, it just stands out to me, is when you look at the soil health research that's been done across the U.S. And if you look at the areas of the U.S. where meter group equipment is located, there is a big hole, and it's almost hovered over Colorado. So that's what we're trying to do with our projects, is to fill that gap.
Awesome. We're glad to help out with that as well. So, no, I think it definitely. I think that is one thing, and because we see this in lots of different, in varied applications, whether you're talking about soil moisture or other soil characteristics, but also we have that with with weather monitoring or whatever sorts of systems. We have a lot of these regional mesonets that are going up throughout the United States and elsewhere. But creating, we've also had people on our podcast talking about creating networks of soil moisture data and soil moisture, water potential, soil water potential, those kinds of matrix potential, that kind of stuff. So definitely, being able to connect. We want to be able to know what's going on in the here and now, but also there's this added imperative, this added urgency to also be able to predict or forecast what's going to be happening in the next 5, 10, 50 years down the road as well. And if we don't have that good data right now to work with, then we're just kind of shooting in the dark type of thing. So
that's one thing we're kind of looking into, because we have meter sensors scattered over a pretty large chunk of the state in all kinds of different agroecosystems, irrigated, non-irrigated, rangeland. So that it got us thinking. But there's initially the idea is to let the producer understand what his practices are doing to soil moisture. But also at the same time, we have, as you mentioned, we're kind of just inadvertently, I guess, building this network of soil moisture monitoring stations across the state. So that might be able to help us answer, some of these questions about, how the different systems respond to drought and so on.
Right, right. And I want to come back to this too, in particular, in talking with you about your main research project, because there's a lot that we want to know and understand about the instrumentation, but also about just the challenges in creating, like you said, inadvertently or on purpose, creating these networks and being able to say, okay, what are the challenges in having all sorts of instrumentation just all over the place about insulation and connecting them all, and not to mention collecting the data as well as analyzing it, and we're dealing with getting into big data issues and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of interesting questions that we can talk about here in a second with that. I want to let's switch gears, and we did have some folks here that wanted to know more about there in Colorado, the STAR program there in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture there in Colorado. Can you tell us a little bit about that program and what it's all about?
Steve's going to pawn it off on me. Okay. So the STAR program is something that was not initially created in Colorado. It initially began in Champaign County, Illinois. It stands for Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources Program. And in Illinois, it was geared around water quality. Mm-hmm. So programs, i.e. management of different parcels of land to help improve water quality that's moving off-site from a parcel of land. We took that concept and, oh my gosh, probably about 3 or 4 years ago in Colorado, we created, with the help of a lot of people, the STAR program that's centered around soil health, not water quality. Again, it still stands for Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources, but it's based on essentially the backbone of the 5 principles of soil health that the NRCS promotes. And so I can't remember all of them. I'm drawing a blank here, but it's soil cover, living roots, introduction of livestock. There's 2 others. I should know these off the top of my head. I've done this for so long. I probably just blank it. I'm blanking. But the 5 principles of soil health that the NRCS promotes. And then what we've done is we've created in Colorado a set of STAR field forms that are housed on the Colorado Department of Agriculture's STAR website. And these field forms were developed hand in hand with producers in different sectors of ag within the state of Colorado. And so we went through, I don't know how many iterations of these field forms, hand in hand with producers, to come up with a scoring system. So producers will, if they're growing corn, for example, in the state of Colorado, they can fill out a field form that's geared towards corn. They're asked a number of different questions, and the questions are scored. Mm-hmm. And then the scores are accumulated, and they fall into one of 5 categories. So they receive a STAR placard. And the STAR placard that goes into their field or on their fence is either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars. 1 star is the producer is doing the average as to what everybody else is doing in terms of focusing on soil health within that type of agroecosystem. And mm-hmm. 5 is you've maxed out all the soil health principles that the NRCS promotes. Hmm. Getting a 5-star is really, really difficult. Getting a 1-star is really, really easy. And we've set this up hand in hand with the producers to do this on purpose, because not everybody should get a 5-star mm-hmm. if they're only doing 3-star work in their field.
Right, right.
And so this is what we've developed, and we have, I think, 11 different field forms for all sorts of different types of crops, and it might even go into. We didn't create a field form for rangelands, did we, Steve?
Grazing lands, yeah. Hmm. It covers rangelands.
Mm-hmm.
But
so,
it's completely voluntary, almost completely voluntary. All right, so there's part of it that's voluntary. If a producer wants to become part of the STAR program, they can. And we also have something called STAR Plus, and this is and this is the incentive-based program from what I remember. So
Correct, yeah.
so other producers who, if they're lucky enough to get into the STAR Plus program, there are certain and additional requirements that they need to meet in order to get an incentive payment from the Colorado Department of Agriculture. But the premise is still the same. They fill out a STAR form, they get a rating, and then what we're trying to do in our programs is to look at these different management practices or tweak these management practices to increase the STAR rating from, say, a 1 to a 2 or maybe a 3 to a 4 on a particular parcel of land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I mean,
Steve?
no, that covers it pretty well. I mean, basically the idea is to just go out and interact with these producers and just have a conversation about soil health and try to get them to, they need to commit to trying out one of the 5 principles of soil health. Just implement a new practice that they haven't tried before on either a portion of their field, a whole new field, and then you just see what happens. And that's what we've kind of started in the past couple of years. We're kind of at the leading edge of these STAR Plus projects. So we don't have any data coming in yet, but it's been interesting just to go out there and interact with all these different folks and all these different agroecosystems.
Yeah, one of the most exciting portions of this project, it's not one project, it's multiple projects that use the STAR program. But I think one of the most exciting things is, one, working hand in hand with producers to come up with a rating system. 2, these placards that will go out into fields, and our programs are supposedly touching about 500 producers across the state, so it's not inconsequential. And so each producer will have a placard that should be visible along some road that they live near or where the field is located, to hopefully generate discussion and interest among other producers, because we all know producers go down to the local coffee shop and chit chat, right? I mean, they do more than chit chat. They talk about what they see. And this hopefully will generate some interest to get more people involved in the program. And the last thing I want to mention to you, which is part of our Climate Smart Commodities project, is we're hoping that this STAR rating system will eventually end up as a market signal. So if you're a producer with a 5-star rating, you might get a little bit extra when you sell your commodity on the market. We're really hoping that this is what this leads to.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to hear that it's, one of my biggest questions with that was, the adoption. Producers and growers are notoriously slow at adopting new technology, new practices, or at least that's the traditional view of how things go. There are some early adopters and here and there, but it's because it's such a risk reward practice when it comes to agriculture, is that if they do see that things are working out towards their benefit, then, at least from what we've seen here, then you can really start to see that shift in best practices from a potential, from traditional practices that have been going on for a century or two to or even more to those where we have kind of either new technology, new ideas, or new innovations in land management. And so that's really good to see. I was interested in that incentive, like how much of an incentive does it take to generate this, to generate buzz or to generate adoption? But it sounds like it's going pretty well there, at least in Colorado. Along with that, and both of you, Steve, you talked about going out and visiting face to face with these growers, with producers, and communicating this program or the benefits to adopting this program or any other, or even if it deals with just soil health in general or other practices. This is one of these questions that kind of pops up with a lot of our guests: is have you felt that there are practices or techniques that you have used that you found successful in communicating, I guess, kind of in translating scientific research to the layperson, or to, in your instance, with growers and producers? Is there, because a lot of times within the scientific community, within academia, again, we're using jargon, we're going back and forth, we're publishing white papers and peer-reviewed journals. That really doesn't percolate down to the general audience, and especially in this case where the general audience, those growers and producers, are the ones who would benefit most from the research that you're doing. So to back this back up again, have you found any, or what are the points of success that you've seen in being able to communicate your research to a lay audience?
Let me give this a shot first, and because I had an extension appointment at Colorado State University, and it was pretty large, and so part of my job was to talk to producers often, outside of the projects that Steve and I and others have going on. But so thinking about in the context of soil health, I remember one of the first talks I gave to producers at a producer conference. Oh my gosh, probably December 2016. And I got a lot of eye rolls when I was talking about soil health, because a lot of there was probably over 100 producers in this room out in Fort Morgan, Colorado. Lots of eye rolls. So I realized quickly that there had to be a better way to get the point across that soil health is important. And so coming back to the point I made at the beginning of the podcast about human health, people really can understand human health. And maybe they can't wrap their heads around soil health. But when you make that analogy and that comparison, it is very simple for people to see where we're coming from in terms of soil health. And that's worked really, really well for me for the last probably 4 years. I don't know, have you run into those issues, Steve?
I generally, I'll kind of take this a little different direction. We rely heavily on our CSU extension program in the state, and they tend to have experts, agronomy type experts in different parts of the state that have experience in different agroecosystems. And these are folks that have developed relationships with producers in the area, so they trust, they've built up this level of trust with the producers. So we rely on them to kind of also help get out the message. Between them and I work for the Ag Experiment Station. We also have about 8 Ag Experiment Stations set up across the state, where they have field days, and we can bring in producers and to kind of explain the research, and they can see firsthand, hey, we tried this different tillage method, and this is what happened. And so that's kind of, so I rely mostly on all these other people in the field.
Let's talk about, you mentioned agroecosystems, and so let's get into kind of the meat of the conversation here. You have this large, federally funded grant project here in dealing with agroecosystem management practices and improvements to that, and how it connects to soil health and ecosystem sustainability, resiliency. Can you give us a little background onto this project and how it came to be, and just kind of introduce us to what you're hoping to do here?
Yeah, we got lucky. I can tell you there's more than just luck involved, but when we started in Colorado this soil health push, really the most recent push started in 2019, July 2019, and there was a lot of people interested in soil health, and that got whittled down to a number of different subsets. And the subset that Steve and I run in, we have a core group of people, myself, Steve, Dr. Megan Mockmuller. We have 2 people from a consulting company called Ground Up Consulting. That's Max Newmeyer and Helen Silver. And then we have a couple postdoc. We have at least one postdoc. But the core that I just mentioned, we work really, really well together. And some people in our group have strengths and weaknesses, just like everybody else. And I think we have a pretty good handle on who has the strengths and who has weaknesses in different sectors. And when I think about being successful, Steve and I and Megan Mockmuller, we have the science down. No doubt about it. we're really good at what we do in terms of science. I don't want to sound like I'm arrogant or anything, but we've done this for a long time. So I think we're really good at what we do. One of the things I think scientists sometimes struggle with is being creative in terms of writing, right? I mean, it just happens. So we have Max and Helen that are creative wizards, and they can put together a proposal that is just really good looking. And we've been very successful. So we do the science, we write the science, and then they write the other portion that makes it look sexy, to be honest with you. And we have been so successful. I think we're running off of, I don't know, a total of 30 million, 34 million. I can't remember. I've lost track of the number. We have this Climate Smart Commodities grant that totals something like 25 million. It's not all coming to Colorado State University because it's split among different entities, but it's 25 million. And we had another one, Federal Conservation Innovation Grant, that was, I think, 3.4 million, and then a few others. And they've built upon one another to the point where we've landed this Climate Smart Commodities grant. And we're looking to the future to keep doing what we're doing now, just on, either in Colorado or outside of Colorado.
And I want to come back to that, because one of the questions I wanted to ask is when you're talking about funding, because I mean it's kind of do or die when it comes to grant writing and looking for funding and all those kinds of things, and so one of the questions was that maybe we can come back to, or you can answer it now and we can splice it in later, but what makes these kinds of large projects attractive for funding? So you talked about, you wrote up the science, you had somebody, some folks make it sound sexy and those kinds of things. What are some of the things that you felt were key to attracting funding from these government programs or funding agencies?
Well, I think the key for this Climate Smart Commodities grant was the fact that we've built this program from the ground up, hand in hand with producers, and we've been lucky to score or land or receive relatively smaller grants that have led to bigger grants that have led to this Climate Smart Commodities grant. And so, being successful in grant development and grant receiving is building a program. And we've been lucky enough to build this program. And so you write a grant like the Climate Smart Commodities grant, and you can put data into that grant that you have from previous grants that are focused on identical topics. And to be successful, we've been really focused. Like our group has been completely focused on soil health. And when you build out something this large, you have to bring other people on board. And I'm a scientist, Steve's a scientist. I won't speak for him, but we've brought in sociologists to take a look at how this STAR program will develop and unfold on a socio scale or socioeconomic scale. And I can't do that. I don't want to do that. So we have sociologists and economists that are going to do that for us. And so that just makes this project this much bigger.
Got it. So let's get into dive into the weeds. What are the main problems or questions that you're looking to answer or dig into when it comes to the project here?
Well, there's a project I'm working on that's it's outside of these STAR programs, but it's soil health, because that's what we do around here apparently. But yeah, there's a project we're looking at degraded rangelands in southeastern Colorado, and just different conditions where they've been overgrazed in the past. And there's a trend, I won't go into a lot of detail, but the municipalities, as water becomes more and more scarce and more expensive, there's lands that are bought up that used to be irrigated, but then they're just allowed to kind of return to a dryland state, because the cities want to use the water for something else, like municipalities. So then, you're left with the task of, so what do we do to these lands that are no longer being irrigated? And, how do we kind of improve them? Do we incorporate grazing, or what kind of amendments can we add? So it's been an interesting challenge, but we've been going out working with these ranchers. It's been kind of almost a bottom-up approach. It's like, go out to them and say, hey, show me some fields that you're having problems with, and we'll kind of talk about why, and then we've set up some plots on some of these kind of degraded, or for lack of a better word, areas, and we're just trying some different techniques to see, if we can improve the productivity of the rangeland. For their, and these are all, cattle grazed lands.
Let me add something about our bigger picture across the state of Colorado. So what we're trying to do, and this is complicated because I can't give you a really good answer as to what we're going to find. I guess that's the premise behind the science is, it's exciting and it's new. And so what we're trying to do is look at across the state of Colorado and adjacent states what management practices work and which ones don't in terms of improving soil health and concomitantly improving soil water or available soil water. So these two go hand in hand. That's really what we're doing. To be honest with you, if you were to take a 30,000 foot view look on the projects that we're running, it's really all about water, especially in the western U.S. And soil health is just tagging along for the ride, to be honest with you. But we are looking at trying to improve soils so they're resilient and sustainable and can hold on to water for a longer period of time and supply water to crops. And so we're trying to find sweet spots in terms of management practices across the state. And so the idea is, this is just an idea. I'm not sure if this is how this is going to work out or not, but we break the state down into different types of cropping systems or agroecosystems, or we break the state down into different ecoregions, or we break the state down into some other type of format that makes sense so we can piece this soil health, or water quality or water quantity puzzle together to help producers across the state of Colorado. And I don't know how it's going to flesh out, but it's going to flesh out one way or the other.
I was going to say, and no matter how we end up breaking it out, I mean, the big hurdle is always variability.
Yeah.
Because there's variability in soils, even within these different practices. There's variability. I mean, like people use different kind of cover crops. There's different kind of tillage practices, even on a conservation tillage side of things. So that's why we're trying to, I mean, that's always going to be a struggle, but we're trying to, try to get hundreds of growers involved in this so we can at least maybe kind of get slightly, kind of clear things up a little bit maybe in some of these different systems.
Right. So what are some of the, what are some of the parameters then that you are looking at, and how are you getting at them? How are you measuring and quantifying those?
Well, we're certainly casting a large net. And that's the beauty of doing research is, if you have the funding, you can cast a large net. And so we're doing this on purpose because we want to collect more data than not enough data. And so
right.
If you're in the sciences field like Steve and I have been in for over 30 years, you always invariably look over your shoulder and said, I should have collected this. I should have collected that. So with these projects, I feel like we won't do that. We won't look over our shoulder and say we should have done this because we're doing it. And we're collecting a lot of data with the hopes to whittle the data set down to something manageable for producers in the state of Colorado. We're collecting soil physical characteristics, biological characteristics, chemical characteristics, nutrient characteristics. We're collecting, sooner or later, we're going to be collecting some microbiome characteristics, which are a little bit outside of, I guess, both of our expertise, but we have other people that will be doing this for us to put a puzzle together that makes sense across however we break this out across the state.
So say for instance, if you're measuring all the various soil characteristics, let's break that down. What are some of those characteristics that you're measuring? How are you measuring those?
Yeah, well, there's things like aggregate stability. I mean, you take a soil sample, all this stuff you take back to the lab,
right?
And you're doing some sort of extraction. But like aggregate stability, within a civil engineering department build a device that Jim uses in his lab it just kind of agitates the sample over time, and you see how well it holds together.
Right.
And yeah, there's different extractants to pull out, like what kind of nutrients are available to plants, nitrogen, phosphorus, all the major nutrients like that. micronutrients as well.
Right.
Yeah. In addition to water aggregate or wet aggregate stability, we measure bulk density. So we'll actually collect a sample that's separate from all the other samples we collect in the field to measure how dense the soil is, I guess. It's the bulk density. We collect soils in terms of biological, we're looking at currently, organic carbon is at the center. And then we look at microbial biomass carbon. We look at something called beta glucosidase activity, which is a measurement. It's an enzyme assay for how easily microorganisms can degrade cellulosic material in soil. So like some of the basic or relatively easy materials to decompose. We look at something called, and Steve alluded to this, we look at potentially mineralizable nitrogen. So how much nitrogen is present in an organic form that could be mineralized over a certain period of time. And we've looked at other assays in the past, some enzyme assays, but I think we're, at least the climate smart commodities, we might be doing some microbiome type assays where we're looking at structure and function of microorganisms within systems. And then, of course, we're looking at pH and electrical conductivity and, like Steve mentioned, nutrient concentrations, both macro and micronutrients. And there's probably some other things. Water holding capacity in the lab on like pressure plates. We're supposedly doing that as well. It's a big list, yeah.
Yeah. So with that big list, I mean, what then you've talked about dealing with collecting a bunch of data. You've talked about the spatial variability or variability with land use. Are there any? I guess what would you consider your biggest hurdle in putting out this large amount of instrumentation or collecting all this data here? Is it the time? Is it just the? I mean, you've got the funding now, so you can purchase the equipment, you can pay for that time. But are there other things that you see that you have seen or foresee as major hurdles in collecting all of this data?
With the soil moisture monitoring in these agroecosystems, you've got to deal with, I mean, these aren't it's not like a forest where you can just put these in the ground and walk away. These are actively, managed fields that are being tilled and all these other practices. So when we started out, we were putting the systems like right in the middle of the field because, we wanted to get like the best representative spot we could find. But, then they'd get knocked over and damaged and we'd have to pull them back out. Depending on whether they were harvesting or tilling. And that was only with like 10 or 12 sites. But now that we're ramping this up with dozens and dozens of sites, we really had to think about a different way to do this. Right. So we're working with meter to kind of, basically we just extended the cables so we can put the logger in at the edge of the field and then run the cable in. And then we work with the grower to try to find a depth. We usually put them in at 6 inches, but we try to find a depth where we can leave them in. Right. Hopefully for the duration of the project for 3 or 4 years. Right. Because logistically, it's just too hard to run back and forth. Yeah. On installing and uninstalling. So it's been challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, and Colorado is such a big state that if you have a site like we do, we're going to be installing these at locations that are 8 hours from Fort Collins. So if something goes sideways, to jump in a car and drive 8 hours to splice a cable together and then drive 8 hours back is a real challenge. So Steve's taken the lead on this. Well, and it's been great because we've bought a trencher too to help with the installs because if we have 500 of these devices to put out, unless you want like really big forearms like Popeye or something, I mean, a trencher is really handy. Yeah. I think, I'm a lab rat mostly, and I think about the bottleneck on that side is just hands, having people. So the Climate Smart Commodities Grant, when it starts rolling, sometime next year we're going to have about 300, almost 400 soil samples come back into the lab. And all that analysis needs to be done. And I can tell you from experience that will take at least a year to get done. With the people that we have, so we need to hire more people. and our space is limited, so we need more space. So fun.
So what are the I mean, we can talk about any preliminary results that, but what are the primary hypotheses that you're testing, or do you, I guess, what are your expectations with connecting, like you said, connecting these agroecosystem management practices to soil health and ecosystem sustainability resiliency?
Yeah, that's a good question. I picked up on the word hypothesis, and so this is a tough one to crack because it's a general hypothesis, but if a producer is following one of the or all of the 5 principles of soil health, the hypothesis would be that soil health would increase in a system, right? And that's a cheesy answer, but that's the answer I can give you, because the way we've set this whole project up and the STAR program in Colorado is to allow the producer to make the decision on what they want to change in terms of management. So it's flipping the research upside down, to be honest with you. As researchers, we come up with the ideas and hypotheses, and then we set up the project and test them. But we're not doing that in this project. The farmers, they're installing the new management practice, and then we kind of go with it. Right. So in some respects, we're flying a little bit without a hypothesis.
Kind of exploratory research there.
Yeah, I mean, and things like, we're always trying to improve or increase organic matter in the soil, but that can take a while.
Yeah.
It can exceed the life of a grant. So it's so you might not see these changes within 3 years.
Right.
Which is, you wouldn't necessarily expect to, but so that makes it kind of challenging.
One of the nice things about the Climate Smart Commodities grant is I think we could potentially eke out 5 years with this. And so from my experience, having worked in Colorado for a really long period of time, these are the places where if you're going to see a change in carbon, you're going to see a change in carbon in the Western U.S. if you do something positive. And that's because our organic carbon content is so low to begin with. So if you make an incremental change, it could be huge, to be honest with you. If you go from 1.5 to 2%, that's huge. It's only a 0.5% change. But if you do that in a system that has low carbon to begin with, like in Colorado, you're going to see more of an improvement than if you went for a 0.5% change in carbon content in a soil in Minnesota that already starts with 7.5% carbon. So this is where my gut is telling me that this is where we're going to see the best bang for our buck in terms of return on investment for improving carbon in our soils. It's going to be in the Western United States. We're going to see drastic improvements. And I'll tell you from some of my experiences with other soil health projects that if you do things, quote, right, you might see a change in less than 5 years. In fact, we had a project over on the western slope of Colorado where we saw changes in 3 years in terms of organic carbon accumulation in the soil surface. In 3 years.
Have you had any issues or challenges in collaborating with I guess again the idea of the collaboration between growers and academics within this project itself? We talked about communication with them. Is this something? Well, let me back this up. Are these, when you're going out and installing or measuring, the assumption is that you're working with growers and not just on experimental fields. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a huge. Most of these are their fields.
Right.
They used to grow what they're growing, and we utilize. We didn't really bring up the. We have a series of conservation districts throughout the state of Colorado, and other entities like that. But it's kind of up to them. I mean, they apply to the Department of Ag and say, hey, we think we can bring on 10 producers in our conservation district. Right. So we rely on these guys to, who already have these relationships with the growers and built this trust. So, I mean, it makes a big difference. And they, and again, the producers don't have to, it's all voluntary. So. Right.
And Jim, you talked about the, potentially increasing carbon by, there in the semi-arid West. by 0.5% would be huge. But do you see other potential impacts of projects like these, if this project or projects like these on agriculture, and I guess kind of the implications for Colorado, the region, and maybe potentially the world at large?
Well, I do, and when you ask a question like that, I come immediately back to the STAR program. And so I recently moved from Colorado State University to Ohio State University, and I'm trying to instill the STAR program within some proposals that we're writing currently to expand this idea of using STAR to quantify soil health, not only in Colorado, but then, of course, the Western U.S. with this Climate Smart Commodities grant, but bringing that concept to the Midwest. And so there's some real opportunities. And we, in Colorado, did, I think, a really good job developing that program to the point where, it can't, I don't think, be lifted directly out of Colorado, but you could take that and then tweak the content in the STAR program to a particular state or region across the United States and probably the globe, to be honest with you. I think that's the benefit of what we've done in the state of Colorado.
And I would just add that, the one thing we haven't talked about is erosion. All these practices help keep the soil in place. You can't have soil health without soil. So
Right.
if you're keeping litter on the surface, if you're, all these different practices, cover crops, having that living root in there, just kind of anchoring the soil, keeping it around, things that, didn't happen back in the Dust Bowl days. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So let's see, Jim, you said you might be able to stretch this out to 5 years, a 5-year project. But looking there at the end, or even, I guess, looking into the future, what do you see as the future of this research? What do you see? You've talked about expanding projects and building project upon project. And what do you see as the future of this research project as it moves forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Climate Smart Commodities project is really mostly Colorado-centric, but it also encompasses 5 states that abut the Rocky Mountain backbone. So New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. All of the land-grant institutions within those 5 states and Colorado State University are working on this project. So the concept is we've built a really strong program focused on soil health in the STAR program in Colorado, and we want to send feelers out to these adjacent states to see if something like this would work in those states. And to be honest with you, Max Newmeyer and Helen Silver have already held discussions with the state of Wyoming, and they're putting together a soil health program much like in Colorado, and they've reached out to other states. I know they're working in the state of Washington to do the same thing. And the state of Washington's on the periphery of the Climate Smart Commodities project, but the concept is to not make this Colorado-centric, but make it
Right.
Western-centric, and then make it nation-centric. So we actually have helped, there's people that are working on this at the STAR central location, or whatever you would call it, in Illinois, to make this a reality across the U.S. That's what I'd like to see. That would be really cool.
Steve, any thoughts on the future of this kind of research?
Other than just, the more we can make this data available to the producers and show them that, hey, it really works, and hopefully not only does it work, but hopefully they'll be seeing increases in yield as their soil health improves. Because, that's the bottom line. They're not going to, they're not growing soil, they're growing crops, right? But
Right.
of course you need good soil to get good crops. So hopefully this will go hand in hand. As they improve the soil, they'll see yields increasing, and then they won't just try it on one field. They'll adopt it over larger portions of their operation. So
Right.
So
Right.
I'll just add to this. So the dream, this is probably pretty crazy. It's a crazy statement coming from somebody who writes proposals to bring in research dollars to do work. But the dream would be to not have to work on soil health ever again. And that may sound crazy, but imagine if you could develop a program that just fine-tuned every single system to a number or a short set of indicators that we know tell you the story of soil health. Or if you could use the STAR forms that, and this is what we're going to do, we're going to match up the STAR forms data to the data we collect in the laboratory. And imagine if you could take just a form that a producer fills out that would tell you what the health of the soil is without having to do the work in the lab. To me, that is really what I'd like to see happen. So people like myself and Steve and others, we can start focusing on other topics of importance and keep this simple. If there could be a simple, there probably is not a simple, but that's the dream.
Right. Well, any other final thoughts or other things that you'd like to share with our audience about what we've talked about or beyond what we've talked about here?
I'll tell you, we're working, and this is outside of the climate smart commodities, but Steve mentioned his work in rangelands, these degraded rangelands, and so we actually have a soil health program where we're looking at using soil health principles and practices and quantification in mineland reclamation, which is really fun because those systems are really, they're like these degraded rangelands that Steve's working on. They're just very wacky. They might be contaminated with heavy metals beyond the point where plants can grow. And so looking at practices to improve these, to grow something, to reduce erosion, like Steve mentioned, and to improve soil health and plant health, and hopefully animal health, because browsing animals come through these areas, and ultimately environmental health. So it's like a One Health concept, if you will. This is what we do.
Yeah, I think we're out of time, but maybe we'll have you back to talk more about rangelands and reclaimed mining and biogeochemical cycling and forever chemicals and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, those are fun things for potential future episodes. We'll see. All right. I think that's it. Our time's up for today. Thanks again, Steve and Jim. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and it's been a great conversation. So thanks again. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time on We Measure the World.